Well, U.S. markets are starting the trading week under significant pressure. The Dow opened trading this morning lower by 1,000 points. The S&P 500 index down by 4.25%, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq shedding more than 6%. Fear is spreading as concerns that there is going to be a sharp slowdown in the American economy. And for more on this, we're joined by Allan Small, Senior Investment Advisor, Allan Small Financial Group. Okay, Allan, so the TSX is closed today. What type of ripple effect can we expect to see tomorrow?
Well, yeah, I think we can see a ripple effect. Obviously, our markets are closed, and tomorrow I think you'll probably see, obviously, starting off on a negative tone. We'll see how the markets close in the United States. That will dictate how our markets will open up. The good news is if we do see a rebound tomorrow in the U.S. or late in the day, in trading day today, that might lessen the blow for us here on the TSX. But I fully anticipate, led by technology, of course, the markets to start off at least the day tomorrow down.
Okay, Allan, what exactly is going on here?
So what's happened is that for whatever reason, for the longest time, we were more afraid of inflation than anything else. The Bank of Canada, Federal Reserve in the U.S., afraid of inflation. Well, we just received some economic data this past Friday in the U.S. Jobs growth is showing to be actually not moving up as much as they anticipated, showing a pretty big slowdown in jobs growth. We saw a bit of a correction to the numbers in the previous month, downward correction, and we saw they were expecting about 185,000 jobs created in the U.S. They ended up getting about 114,000 jobs created. That people started to think, investors started to think, well, are we starting to have a bigger slowdown in the U.S. than the Federal Reserve is actually anticipating? And so maybe investors started to think, well, maybe the Federal Reserve in the U.S., they haven't cut interest rates yet. Maybe they're behind. Maybe they should have already cut by now. Maybe the U.S. may fall into some sort of mild recession. And that fear started to spread throughout the U.S., throughout the world, actually. That coupled with some announcements out of Japan regarding their currency. And we had some negative markets in Asia that spilled over into Europe and obviously into the United States today. Their markets are obviously open for trading. So this whole fear of a possible slowdown in the U.S., a quicker slowdown than the Federal Reserve is anticipating, that has sparked fears in the market. And then we started to see a sell-off primarily or led by the technology sector.
Hey, Allan, can you break this down and sort of describe what this will look like affecting day-to-day life?
Well, I think everyone who invests pretty much, this is going to affect you, right? Anyone who has an RSP account, anyone who has a TFSA account, if you're investing in the market, either through individual stocks, through mutual funds, your portfolio will unfortunately be affected come tomorrow here in Toronto. So that is how it's going to affect us. Now, don't panic. Obviously, that's the worst thing you could do. When you see a market down like this, if people are hearing about it in Toronto, about what's going on in the U.S., understand that actually in the U.S., the market has come back a little bit. It's not down as much as it was at the start of trading. It's actually down about 2%, just over 2% in the U.S., so not as big a fall as we heard in Asia or even in Europe. So things are starting to get a little bit better. Cooler heads are starting to prevail. But having said that, yes, unfortunately, our portfolios will be a little bit lower come tomorrow for those that start the work week tomorrow. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it. However, I think cooler heads will prevail going forward. And in my opinion, this will probably be a minor blip. And I don't anticipate this being, people's biggest fears, right? This big crash in the markets. I don't envision that. I envision a correction in the markets, which we're already seeing. How long it will last, difficult to say. It may last a little bit longer. But I think the market is in a good position. The economy is in a good enough position, both in Canada and the U.S., to weather these kinds of events.
Allan, that brings me to my next question. Just in reading about this today, I've seen talk of a recession thrown around even more. Let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, and that's the fear, right? That the U.S. is actually slowing down a lot more than the central bank believes it is. Central bank meaning the Federal Reserve. And so unlike us here in Canada, we've already cut interest rates. The Bank of Canada has cut interest rates 2 times already. Federal Reserve hasn't cut yet. And in fact, they've said most recently that they look to be possible cut in September, but they're not 100% sure, and they haven't really given us an indication one way or the other. So we're cutting significantly here. It looks like our Bank of Canada is a little bit more fearful of our economy and the slowdown here than they are in the U.S. And that, to many investors, seems to be a bit of a mistake. everyone is fearing that they're actually heading for a recession and their central bank isn't doing anything about it. They're not cutting rates in anticipation of a slowdown. So they're behind, I guess, in the curve. They're behind in cutting rates, and that could lead to a further recession. And that's the fear. The fear is that the U.S. could fall into recession. Again, keep in mind, just a couple of weeks ago, the biggest fear was inflation, that a recession wasn't even a thought in investors' minds. All of a sudden, we get a few economic data points. They come out showing slower manufacturing, slower job creation in the U.S., and all of a sudden we go from a fear of inflation to a fear of recession, and that has really spooked the markets, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing today in the U.S. markets and really all around the world.
Okay. Allan Small, Senior Investment Advisor, Allan Small Financial Group. Thank you very much for making time for us on this long weekend.
Thanks for having me.